Well, friends, welcome to the Vancouver School of Theology's 2022 G. Peter Kaye Lecture. Tonight, we have about 200 friends for this important webinar. My name is Richard Topping. I'm the president of VST and professor of studies in the Reformed tradition. Vancouver School of Theology is located on the UBC Point Grey campus, which sits on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. G. Peter Kaye, after whom this lecture is named, was both the Chancellor and the Chair of the Board of Governors at the Vancouver School of Theology. He was, quote, a person of incredible integrity and stature, a very warm and gentle human being. He was one of the outstanding lay leaders in the Anglican Church in the Diocese of New Westminster for many years, and he left his mark on the diocese in a very effective way. This lectureship was established in 1987 by the Vancouver Foundation to honor its former chairperson, G. Peter Kaye. It brings to the campus scholars of international reputation, chosen for their ability to make a serious intellectual contribution to theological inquiry in a way that nourishes the spiritual life of the church and the wider community. And we're thrilled that our guest lecturer for today, whose life and work fulfill this purpose to an astonishing degree. After the lecture, there'll be opportunity for questions, and we invite you to type your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom, which you can find at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can in our time together, finishing no later than 8:30. I'd like now to invite our new VST Chancellor, Ms. Catherine Evans, to introduce our lecture for 2022.
Well, thank you, Dr. Topping, and once again, welcome everyone. I'm very pleased to make my VST debut here with you this evening on the occasion of the G. Peter Kaye Lecture. We're particularly fortunate to have Dr. Santa Ono, President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of British Columbia, as our guest speaker. Not only can Dr. Ono speak from the perspective of a person of both faith and leadership, but his background in the field of molecular immunology gives him a far greater understanding of the crisis we are in than most of us could begin to imagine. Over the course of his career, Dr. Ono has received many honors and awards, including honorary doctorates from both Chiba University and our own Vancouver School of Theology. He's also served in leadership positions as president of the University of Cincinnati, senior vice-provost and deputy to the provost at Emory University, and on the boards of a variety of university-related organizations. On the teaching front, after graduating from the University of Chicago and McGill Universities, he held appointments at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and University College London. One thing you might not know about him is that he is a Twitter star. I followed him on Twitter for many years, and if you are on Twitter, I encourage you to do so as well. And now I'm very pleased to turn over the spotlight to Dr. Santa Ono.
Thank you very much, Catherine and Richard. I hope you can hear me. It is really a thrill for me to be with all of you today. I admire the Vancouver School of Theology greatly, and I'm looking forward to this interaction. And I hope to meet with many of you in person as soon as it's safe. And so good evening, everyone. And I'm very honored to be here tonight to deliver the G. Peter Kaye Lecture. Truly an icon in this community, and it is really an honor to deliver this lecture. The topic I'll be addressing is faith and leadership in a time of crisis. And this is, of course, a time of crisis for a number of reasons, and chief among them is the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all dealing with on a daily basis. And it's a crisis that the entire world has been grappling with for 2 years now. Who would have imagined that we would be in the midst of this crisis for 2 years? But there are many other crises. There's a climate emergency, as you know, and there's quite a bit of divisiveness around the world. And you just have to turn on the news every day to appreciate the challenges that we all collectively face. Though there are signs of hope on the horizon, with the advent of mRNA vaccines and really a coordinated effort to try to address these existential challenges, the very fact that I'm speaking to you remotely tonight shows that the crisis is still very much with us at present. And as you know, we're not only talking about Omicron now, but also variants of Omicron. And so we do have to keep an eye on what's happening. And we cannot assume that we're beyond this wave and out of the crisis. But as I said, it's not the only crisis that we face. We're also confronting this environmental crisis that has manifested itself in many ways here in British Columbia, and that has the potential to be even more devastating than COVID-19. We've experienced it here in a number of ways with record snowfalls and rains, heat waves, and tornadoes. In addition, we're confronting the legacy and consequences of colonialism and racism. The discovery of unmarked graves at former residential schools, and the continued incidents of race-based violence and injustice remind us that these too are crises that we need to address individually and collectively and as institutions. The question that we face is, can faith help lead us through these multiple crises? As a person of faith, and as a leader of a large, complex institution of over 90,000 people, I certainly hope so, and I do believe so. It's actually my faith that carries me from one day to the other, even in the darkest of days. At times like these, the strength of leadership at both the micro and macro levels is suddenly revealed. When the ground is shifting so rapidly beneath our feet, it's easy to lose our footing and our focus, and all of us stray from our faith. And so we look to those around us, we look to our leaders of our nations, of our province, of our institutions, to regain clarity and purpose. And then we look at them individually, but also collectively, understanding that all of them are under tremendous duress. And all of them, being humans, will be guilty of sin, and they will have missteps and mistakes. And recognizing that each leader is capable of sin and mistakes, we really do have to look across the whole breadth of leadership that lies before us. And we also look to our faith, really as the only unblemished form of leadership in the Lord and Jesus Christ. But if we look to our leaders, where do our leaders look to? It's incredibly important because they're under continuous stress, and they are being drawn in different directions, sometimes by individuals that have agendas that are not pure. And that is, I argue, where faith becomes incredibly important, not only as a North Star for the leaders, but also to ensure that the goodwill of everyone is actually paramount. Now, it's a privilege and responsibility for anyone to lead. It is my privilege and responsibility to be a leader of an institution as wonderful as UBC. For now 6 years, I've had the honor to serve as president and vice-chancellor of the University of British Columbia. And as I'm sure you know, UBC has 2 campuses, now a third actually, one in Vancouver here in Point Grey, the other in the interior of the province in the Okanagan and Kelowna, and now one in Surrey, which was announced just a few months ago. More than that, it comprises 16 independent faculties, 18 schools, 2 colleges, 68,000 full-time students, from more than 160 nations and 17,000 faculty and staff. It really is a large town or a small city, as people like to say. And leading such a complex institution is, I'll admit, demanding, even in normal times. But during a time of not one, but multiple crises, it's even more challenging. Yet it is at such times that leadership is most important. And I argue it is at such times that one's faith is most important. Now, my own leadership philosophy is one called servant leadership, which was developed by Robert K. Greenleaf in 1964, just 2 years after I was born on the Point Grey campus of UBC, when my father was a professor of mathematics here. And since 1964, this philosophy has been refined by many over intervening decades. And it's taught in schools of management or commerce or business, but it's also taught in many other faculties. And I think it's a good thing that this model of leadership is taught to people in many different sectors. Servant leaders focus first on the growth and well-being of others. It's not a top-down kind of leadership. It's one that's focused on the individuals that the leader serves. Such leaders aim to build strong communities, to lead by influence rather than power, by example rather than by authority. They start from a position, or they should, of humility and respect for everyone in their community. And they endeavor to strive to listen and to serve with compassion and empathy. In his 1970 essay on servant leadership, Greenleaf wrote, and I'll quote, "The best test and difficult to administer is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived?" Servant leadership certainly doesn't mean that you don't have to make tough decisions or assert yourself and be a leader. But these individuals, when they approach people from a foundation of mutual respect, no one is left feeling disempowered or disrespected or dehumanized. And there really is no secret formula for servant leadership, but there are some important guiding principles. You have to support your teams, grow them, each of them, as individuals. You have to listen first, listen well and often. You have to focus all of your efforts not on you, but on building community, to reflect and to learn and to be committed to continuous improvement and to admitting your mistakes. This approach can be extremely effective when you're trying to turn a big ship and get everyone paddling in the same direction. And it can be applied, I think, broadly, not only to academia, but to the front lines, to the C-suite, from Fortune 500 companies, to churches, and to universities. So when a pandemic hits, we don't have to cast about for a new approach to managing if you've committed to a particular management style. And I think during a crisis, servant leadership, in my view, is the best way to lead. Such leaders will simply return to the lessons of servant leadership embodied in the Bible that have served us so well over the past decades, if not before. Once again, if you turn to our various communities, listen carefully to their needs, to their fears, and there are many fears during a crisis such as COVID-19, but also to listen to their desires, the desires to actually migrate out of a pandemic, and their aspirations. Imagine a student who hasn't had a proper graduation from high school, a proper entry into university. As a leader, you have to listen to those desires and those aspirations, and you have to make it clear that at some point we will come out of this dark tunnel, and that at some point we will come back to a normal situation post-pandemic. As a leader, it's really important to listen to those fears, desires, and aspirations, and to emanate hope, because that is one of the things that those that you serve will look for. Servant leadership, it won't have escaped your notice, is very much in keeping with our faith, my faith. As Jesus says in Mark 10:45, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." If you listen and read that verse on a daily basis, it will be your North Star. I repeat, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So whoever you are, a leader of a nation, of a province, of a university, of a company, I argue that your focus on service should be agnostic of your role. And actually, it transcends one's denomination or faith. It stems from the Bible, but the lesson that it serves to those who read it applies to everyone. It's really about your responsibility for others and focusing, in fact, giving your life in ransom for the glory of others. And so it's entirely consistent with my own faith that I seek to be supportive of all faith groups, even though I'm a Christian, of students, faculty, and staff who are still searching or have decided that there's no room for faith in their own lives. I still need to serve them, regardless of what their beliefs or interests might be. Take, for example, UBC. It's a very different place than the Vancouver School of Theology. It's a secular institution. But there are about 24 student clubs that have some sort of faith affiliation. I don't focus so much on the similarities and distinctions of the particulars of different religions. I focus more on the fact that for individuals that do have a faith, it's an important part of their identity. It's an important part of their wellness. And actually, if you do focus on the particulars of different religions, you will see servant leadership in almost all of those religions. For that reason, at a secular university like UBC, I can be supportive of very different kinds of people with different faiths and different beliefs, understanding that for each different group of people, there are different ways that are necessary to support them and to really support their wellness. I'd like to give a bit of insight into my own development as a leader and my own faith journey, because neither came naturally to me. My own faith journey is certainly not remarkable in any way, shape, or form. In many ways, it wasn't meant to be. I think I owe it to God and to those around me that I was able to find Jesus, and that I was given the privilege of being a servant leader, to have learned from Jesus. I'll tell you how that came about. As I said, I was born here in Vancouver in 1962, some years after my father and mother had emigrated from Japan to North America. At that time, when I was born, my father was a professor of mathematics at UBC. My mother and father were not believers and did not practice any religion. From kindergarten through 12th grade, despite growing up in a predominantly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant neighborhood in Philadelphia first and then Baltimore, after leaving Vancouver as a toddler, I had no concept of what happened in churches. I walked past them going to school or in the car driving with my parents. And later, we saw churches everywhere. But I didn't really know what happened inside those churches. I thought they were beautiful. But I rarely stepped foot inside a church. Didn't understand what happened and why so many people went to church every Sunday, and that there were special occasions during the holidays. The only times we as a family would enter churches would be to listen to music. My father loves music, and we would go there on Christmas Eve, or to hear someone play in a church, either a piano or a trio, just because that's where the concert happened to be. I didn't think the pews were very comfortable, but I was curious about what actually happened on Sundays and on evenings and afternoons, why many of my friends would spend after school going to church. Their churches, I thought, were nodes of activity, places where people built community, places where people's lives were formed, where people learned in an intergenerational way. In many ways, I was jealous of not being part of that mysterious activity happening in churches. But I thought that churches were community social clubs where people gathered on Sunday for coffee, and where my friends attended Boy Scout group meetings. My first introduction to God and Jesus occurred in my freshman year, first year of university, as a student at the University of Chicago. With the sudden freedom of living far away from home and with no parental guidance, I slipped into a common trap. Perhaps some of you did as well. I went to too many parties, occasionally drank too much on Friday nights and weekends. Indeed, I think that part of my binge drinking had to do with a deep dissatisfaction with my life deep inside my soul. Maybe a lack of a reference point, a lack of a spiritual anchor, which I didn't understand at the time. There was one particularly risky evening when I had far too much to drink. It was hanging from an open windowsill on the 5th floor of my hall of residence on a very cold night in Chicago. I don't remember much about that evening, other than that two of my friends rescued me from that windowsill, pulling me up out from the cold and helped me get into bed. It was a very difficult night, and they stayed by my side the entire night to ensure that I made it through that evening. And I'm sure that some of you have friends to whom you similarly owe your lives. These two friends were very active in church on campus, in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and started to take me with them to different church services. We went to Bond Chapel with one of my friends. It's a Catholic chapel, and also to Rockefeller Church, a very large cathedral-like building on the campus of the University of Chicago. It took me to InterVarsity groups, both large and small. They also took me back home to their suburbs, the suburbs of Chicago, to attend their churches, to meet with their ministers, to mingle with their home congregations. In particularly, they took me to their families for some family love because they thought I was lost. I didn't understand my feelings at the time. I remember feeling very special when I entered these churches. I felt chills down my spine as I knelt down to pray, not understanding what prayer meant. Although I had virtually no knowledge of the Bible, there was something about simply being in those churches, in the house of the Lord, that moved me as I had never been moved before. And I can tell you, I still feel the same way today when I go into a church. Whether it's a grand cathedral or a small campus church, whether it's a classroom with students at the University of British Columbia and other members of the faculty and staff, I still feel the same way. After graduating from the University of Chicago, I made my way back to Canada to become a graduate student in experimental medicine at McGill University. My girlfriend at the time from the University of Chicago was meant to join me in Montreal, but she never ended up doing so. And I quickly spiraled into a deep depression. I began drinking again heavily and had suicidal thoughts, and in fact, attempted suicide. Fortunately, I encountered a fellow graduate student. She played the piano, I played the cello. And the pianist's name was Wendy Yip. Sometime later, we would start dating, and eventually she became my wife, and we're still married today. Wendy took over from my friends at the University of Chicago. She took me to her church. I was doubtful, smart alecky, a non-believer when I accompanied her to church, even though I had already had those feelings, the chills down my back whenever I entered a church. We would spend hours talking about why I had problems believing in God and Jesus. I had been educated as a scientist to look for proof, and I could see no proof of the existence of God or Jesus. After many conversations and my attendance at a Sunday school with 11-year-olds as an 18-year-old, as a 22-year-old, I'm sorry, I started to understand through the stories in the Bible, the miracle of the Lord Jesus and the tremendous wisdom in the scriptures, the persuasiveness of the Bible and the power on those who believed, and I've developed my faith. All of that was evidence that there must be a God. A particular pastor, Dr. Lloyd Pierce, worked with me and my faith emerged and grew stronger day by day. I'll never forget the day I was baptized in Montreal at Westmount Baptist Church on a glorious sunny Easter day. Still one of the most joyous days of my entire life. Although my attendance at church would be variable, and is still so today, I became an even more committed Christian once my first daughter was born. There was a pivotal moment when I was a senior Vice-Provost and Deputy Provost at Emory University in Atlanta. Emory was originally a Methodist university, but is now a secular multi-faith university. I discussed the issue of faith with the then president of the university, James Wagner, Jim affectionately, and also with a professor of theology that I admired greatly, a former Catholic priest, Tom Flynn. President Wagner was relatively open about his faith. He's a Presbyterian. But he reminded me that as a senior administrator, it was important for me to respect and support staff, faculty, and students of every faith, as well as those who had decided not to believe. Professor Flynn, on the other hand, was different. Although he was a Catholic priest, he was extremely discreet about letting people know about his faith. He encouraged me to hide my Christianity and to be, as he said, a stealth Christian. And the reason why he encouraged me to hide my faith was that in a secular institution, he cautioned me there would be professors and staff that would look down upon me because of my faith. That my faith would be some sort of admission that I, myself, as a scientist, was not as rigorous as a secular scientist. That there was some kind of contradiction in my faith and my commitment to evidence-based decision-making. After more than a year considering the possible options of how I would behave, I made a firm decision not to be a stealth Christian. In fact, I decided to immerse myself in supporting students of all faiths at Emory University. I continued this practice at the University of Cincinnati and now at UBC, serving as a faculty advisor and a board member for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. Since moving to UBC, I've maintained my approach in supporting faculty, students, and staff in whatever faith they might practice, and regardless of whether they are believers or not. But I do not hide my Christianity. I refuse to be a stealth Christian. For a large proportion of our campus community, whether faculty, staff, students, or alumni, faith plays an important role in their identity and their wellness. And therefore, it's important for me to respect each of those faiths. It's important for me to be supportive of their needs and to advocate for them with respect to their need on a secular campus to fulfill that part of their identity and their well-being. Now, I said earlier that becoming a leader was not a natural path for me either. My path to one of faith and believing wasn't natural. And my path to becoming a leader wasn't natural either. When I was growing up, I was the black sheep of the family. One of my two brothers was destined to be a mathematics professor, and the other a concert pianist. Now, by the way, if you're watching the Super Bowl, one of the 1-minute commercials will feature my brother, Ken Ono. You should look out for it. It's actually in the beer commercial for Miller Lite. And the first part of the commercial talks about his achievements as a mathematician. He's that eminent. And the question at the end of the commercial is, what number is bigger, 64 or 80? And it's really a comparison between two light beers. Look out for it on Super Bowl Sunday. But that's how remarkable a mathematician he has become. The other was meant to be a concert pianist, as I said. And he would go on as a teenager at the age of 13 to play as a concert pianist with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra and the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. And then there was me. I played pretty well, but no orchestra would want me as a soloist. And I certainly didn't have much talent as a mathematician. And so my parents decided that I should become a businessman. My family was actually surprised when I was actually admitted to and graduated from the University of Chicago and received a PhD from McGill. They were even more surprised when I became a university professor and got tenure, first at Johns Hopkins and then at Harvard University, and when I received an endowed chair and became a department head at University College London. I think they, at that point, believed that I could do it. I became an academic because of my natural curiosity and passion for science. That passion and curiosity led me to an academic career in medicine and biology. As I progressed in my academic career, I also began to assume administrative and leadership responsibilities. First at Emory University, and then at the University of Cincinnati, and now at UBC. But I never set out to be a leader. I'm privileged to be in this position at what I consider to be one of the world's most outstanding universities. And I'm humbled at where my path, with the help of God, with his example, that of Jesus, have led me. There are multiple gifts that result from having a spiritual path. My own faith keeps me anchored and keeps me focused on why I'm meant to be, I believe, in a leadership position, on why I should use my efforts to help individuals, students, faculty, and staff, and people beyond the university because of the reach of an institution, the size and breadth of UBC. It's especially important, as I began, at times of crisis such as this. We have many difficult decisions to make. We have important roles to play as an institution in healthcare delivery. We have important responsibilities, and we have to make decisions about how we vector resources so we can be part of the solution in fighting the pandemic. And I'm so proud that UBC as an institution is serving others by helping to innovate a new generation of mRNA vaccines that's saving the lives of millions of people. As Jesus says in Matthew 22, verse 37, love the Lord thy God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. And that's what I try to do as much as possible as president of UBC. That phrase, with all of your mind, invites us to welcome discourse and dialogue and difficult questions in our spiritual life. Through questioning our faith, I believe we become stronger individuals, and that our faith actually becomes stronger. For me, a real gift of the spiritual path is that you grow as an individual and that your faith becomes stronger because you're constantly asking yourself questions and perhaps sometimes doubting your decisions, sometimes doubting whether you're being a good leader. This is really at the heart of what I believe it means to be an innovative leader. How do we welcome innovation in our spiritual lives through questioning our actions, and listening to the questions and criticisms of others. We become better servant leaders. There are churches and congregations where there is active debate. There are schools of theology where there is active debate. And sometimes there's tension between different members of a congregation or different faculty members and students in a school of theology, or different parts of a single congregation, or between the congregation and the minister. The same thing happens at universities. I can tell you. You can really see it manifest in the Senate meetings that we've had this year. People fervently believe that their view is the right one, and the view of the other group is wrong. And sometimes I worry, but it's magical. Over the period of hours, point and counterpoint, question and debate. As a group, I think that the community comes to a consensus and a better decision. And the same is true whether you're in a church or school of theology or a university. But some people don't want to be in that kind of environment. It's uncomfortable. But I believe that those are the strongest churches, the strongest schools of theology, the strongest universities, the strongest places for someone to make the right leadership decisions, the strongest places and the best environments to cultivate new servant leaders. Because if you're in that kind of a situation and people are asking you tough questions, it forces you to listen, to question your own beliefs, with the commitment always being focused on serving others, even those that you disagree with. We really come to believe when our faith is challenged, when our decisions are challenged, when we work through inconsistencies or differences of opinion. In the same way, the best universities are the ones where people have the freedom of voice, the freedom to voice different opinions and points of view, to either change their mind or strengthen in their belief based upon honest discourse. And that happens in the Bible. Not everyone supported Jesus Christ in his views, and they even betrayed him. But that contrast, that betrayal, actually highlights the glory of the Lord through Jesus Christ. To explore the questions and mysteries of science and faith together, and to acknowledge the humility of what we don't know, all of that has strengthened my faith. I think I've spoken too much. But in closing, I'd like to once more say how honored I am to be here, to give this lecture, how excited I am to share my faith with you. And I hope that my journey has been interesting and maybe, hopefully, instructive in considering the question of leadership during the time of crisis. While we're in the middle of the crisis, it's not always fun. It's not always something that you think that you will solve in a given day. But I truly believe that these crises are here to make us better leaders so that we can serve those that we have the privilege of serving to the best of our abilities in the glory of God. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ono, for sharing those stories of leadership and your own personal faith and its importance in the work that you do as someone who is the president of a college on the campus of UBC. Your leadership has meant a great deal to our own institution and helped us through the current times with the various crises we also face. So thank you for your life and example and leadership, and for your faith and honesty and vulnerability with us this evening. Friends, I'd like to invite you to be a part of the discussion. In the Q&A function, you can write in your questions, and Catherine and I will address them to Professor Ono. So you're more than welcome to do that. We have a question here already from one of our VST students, and I'll read this to you, Professor Ono. He says, "Hello, Professor Ono. In your opinion and personal observation, what is something we're not doing today as a response to the current and the ongoing pandemic that we should to better navigate this almost never-ending uncertainty? Thank you so much."
I think that there are lessons to be learned from the Bible. I mean, if you look at all of the challenges that the Lord Jesus Christ had to face, especially as it led up to his crucifixion, for me, that inspires me. His strength during these very difficult times when people were betraying him is a shining example of how we should be. The difficulties that we're all experiencing during these pandemics cannot be understated. I know that people are in pain. People are losing loved ones. People are losing jobs. Youngsters are really struggling with the challenges of dealing with remaining at home, not being able to be with friends. And so I think there's a reason that the Bible is such a powerful resource, that so many people read it, so many people go to it on a daily basis, because it's the example of Jesus Christ as the ultimate servant leader. It's meant to be there with you in the darkest of moments. Now, people ask me, what do you do when you've had a terrible day? I do one of two things. Richard, I play the cello, which I actually think is the sound from the heavens. When you listen to Bach or Beethoven or whatever you like, it touches your soul. You feel something more beautiful, more transcendental than what you're experiencing around you. And the Bible is the same. It's just a bunch of pages with black letters, but it's extraordinary how you can go to a particular verse and be inspired by the stories. And so I think that's what we should be doing, to answer your question.
Thank you. We had a note here, Professor Ono, that said next time, I don't know which faculty it is, but when they have a meeting, they'd like to invite you to come and play the cello.
It would be my pleasure.
Science faculty there. Yeah.
It'd be my pleasure. Actually, one of our lectures that in the physics department was the physics of sound from instruments. So I actually showed up with my cello. And it's extraordinary, the difference between a cello that's just sort of pedestrian and, a regular cello and Stradivarius. There aren't that many differences. They're both made of wood. They have varnish, they have strings. And you can put the best strings onto a very cheap cello that looks almost like an expensive cello, and the sound will be dramatically different on these very small differences. And you can actually take a new cello, and you can actually, before you varnish it, you can actually shave off a little bit here and there. It'll make all the difference in the world to the sound of that instrument. It's kind of like a student or a scholar that through the process of education and formation and mentoring, you're still the same person, but these external influences will actually buff you here and there and make you into a better scholar, a better human being. Same thing about a cello. And so to whoever asked that question, I try to bring the physics of the instrument, because there's a lot of physics in how a string actually vibrates and how the sound actually goes through the bridge into the cello. But some of it's actually also a mystery. You can't explain the difference. And here's my point. You can't explain the difference between a Stradivarius and, just an average cello by physics alone. Some of it is mystery. Some of it is in the wood. What kind of wood is there? And I think that that requires something that you can't explain. It requires a faith in sort of the convergence of the kind of wood, the kind of varnish, the thickness here and there. Some of it's accidental. It's almost as if it was meant to be that instrument would be remarkable. And so that kind of thing actually solidifies my view that not everything can be explained, and that you need to have a faith to truly understand everything from the physics of sound to just thinking about how a cell works or how the nervous system works. You have all kinds of very bright people trying to understand that, right? Trying to deconstruct what the Lord did. Mm-hmm. And as smart as we are, we cannot create anything that even approximate or even comes close to what the Lord has created, Lord God has created. And that's why I have faith.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So thank you for that. I'm going to ask a question that was put into the chat rather than the Q&A, but it hasn't gotten lost, and so I'll ask it now. It's, how does your faith help you work with groups who have very diverse views, diverse to the extent of not being willing to listen to each other?
I've had to work with all kinds of people, some who are very challenging, who are very difficult. And once again, you look into the Bible, look at the way Jesus was treated. Not that the leader is anywhere near Jesus. We're all, approximations, right? We're just in his image. But, despite, being spat on and rocks being thrown at him, he still served. He still loved those who hated, who were there to actually hurt him. And so to answer your question, that's the lesson that I take from his life, his example as the ultimate servant leader. And my experience has been that most of these individuals that may not want to listen or may be very challenging, if you put enough time and effort and actually listen, they usually come around. It's very rare that there'll be a completely intransient individual that you can't ultimately have a meeting of mind with. And that's why listening is important. That's why, as a leader, you need to have a humility, because it's sometimes humiliating to be a leader. People like to attack you if you're in a leadership position. They'll do so in many different ways, to your face, behind your back. And you have to let that go. You need to have a humility and say, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that you try to understand the root cause of their anger or why they might be concerned, and you learn from that. And it helps you have a wider perspective around a problem, to learn about an anxiety that you may not have because you are in a privileged situation. And so hopefully that answers your question. There are people that are very difficult, and on occasion, you almost want to pull your hair out or leave. But ultimately, if you come back and you really think about it in a peaceful way, you actually learn from them.
Is there a difference between dealing with an individual and dealing with a mob?
It's easier to deal with an individual usually than a mob. I've been in situations where I've been in angry groups of people. I don't like to use the word mob because it has a negative connotation, because there's usually a reason why people are upset. I'll give you two examples. Some of you know that during my years here, student activists gathered in thousands outside of the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center. to declare a climate emergency. A lot of my peers at other institutions, university presidents and boards, have still to this day are resisting those cries for those in leadership positions to do something about the climate emergency. And I actually wrote an article in Inside Higher Education about that experience, looking at thousands of students angry about what they viewed was a failure in leadership of world leaders, of university leaders, of board of governors of institutions, to make decisions that would protect this planet Earth, this great gift where the miracle of life is occurring. And still to this day, some of my peers are resisting calls for divestment, resisting that the institution invest in a more sustainable campus, resisting the call to ask questions about the inequities in climate justice. The fact that climate change is affecting disproportionately those who are less privileged than those who are privileged. And if you really think about it, it's threatening as a leader to be challenged by thousands of people. But my approach during that time was to say, well, let's listen to the students. And the more I listened to them, and the more I looked into why they were concerned and they're anxious, and they're still anxious today, and they have every right to be anxious and to be angry, I learned something. You know, they were initially much more up to speed and understanding of the climate emergency that we face today. And people who were in leadership positions 5-10 years before me believed it was a hoax, that it wasn't actually real, that we weren't actually, threatening this beautiful planet that the Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord created for us. So I don't want to use the word mob. By listening to them, I think the institution has made the decision to be all in, to do everything it can through the remarkable research and expertise that we have to be part of the solution. And so I'm grateful to them. So hopefully that's one example. The other example is in the University of Cincinnati, which was in part of the inner city of Cincinnati. And there was a tragedy that occurred. One of the university security officers in the US campus security have guns. And one of the officers, and this is all in the public domain, pulled over a car of an African-American that was driving the car near the campus, not on campus, but near the campus, that was lacking a front license plate. In the US, some police officers and security officers do that. And it's not fair. They will profile people who are driving cars and pull over cars, often on the basis of skin color of the driver. Well, the tragedy was that he pulled the driver over. He had his gun. He had the body camera on. And the driver was scared. And the car started to move forward, and he shot dead the African-American driver. So I don't want to use the word mob, but some would say that it was very difficult. There was huge anger in the community. And one of the things that I did was to actually go to his church. I apologized to his mother for his death. And I went to his church where there was great anger towards the university and suspicion of me and suspicion of the institution. And but I went there for a reason, because I wanted to first understand their anger. And second, I wanted to show that as the president of the university that employed this security officer, that I needed to be accountable to represent the institution, not only in moments of glory when the teams are winning, football games or basketball games, but also to be there as a representative of the institution when the institution or part of the institution does something wrong. It's not easy, but I think it's part of being a servant leader. Being a servant leader doesn't mean that you only care for those in your institution. It means that you also need to serve those who are impacted by the institution. And it ultimately made me a better leader. It made me more empathetic. It made me understand the privilege that we as an institution held over many of the citizens around the institution. It made me understand that there were some deficiencies in how we trained and members of police forces and campus security, and it led to reform in not only how we as an institution dealt with the issues of security. It was a lesson that's studied and taught in schools of education, faculties of education to this day, how we actually dealt with those inequities, those injustices. And so, it's hard, but it's necessary. And I'm glad that I'm fortunate to have been in those situations because it has shaped me as a leader and has made me more empathetic to others who are less privileged.
Thank you. Richard, there's quite a number of questions showing up in the Q&A, so I'll switch it over to you now.
Thank you. Yeah, Professor Ono, a question about who are the exemplars for you when you think of good embodiments of servant leadership, maybe with an eye to who are people in the secular world who embody servant leadership?
Well, actually, many of the examples that I'll mention have as their grounding, there's a faith, Nelson Mandela, is one remarkable person. Martin Luther King, he's a reverend. What a servant leader. He lost his life for freedom. And so there are many, but those are some. They're not all those sorts of leaders that go through tremendous self-sacrifice for the betterment of those around them. There are other people who really inspire me. There's if you think about how things have changed in the lifespan that I've had, there was great gender inequity for the longest time, and there still is, but we're making tremendous progress. I look to secular individuals in the academy and elsewhere that really fought for gender equality. It's when I was applying to universities, I don't know if you remember, Richard, that the Ivy League schools weren't admitting women. Columbia had Barnard, Harvard had Radcliffe. For the longest time, many of these schools were only open to men. So those sorts of things I look to as addressing inequities and the individuals. Some of them are well known, some of them are unknown, but those individuals who can look at a situation, an organization, and say this is not just, and looks out for equal access and equity in what one can do with their lives. Those people inspire me. But most of those people, many of those people are people of faith, I have to say.
Thanks very much, Professor Ono. I'll turn it back over to Catherine, please.
So this might follow from this discussion. So Dr. Ono, could you comment on where you see or don't see servant leadership in our political leaders? And if you don't see it currently, what might it look like in the context of the protests that are taking place at the present time?
Well, I'd be real careful. This is like an open lecture, right? So
it's recorded as well.
I don't want to name names then for that reason. To be frank, I represent an institution that has to work with all of these leaders, and so to be very frank and very transparent, I need to to preserve those relationships. So I do not want to be critical of individuals, but if you don't mind, I'd rather talk about in generalities. Certainly, I'm worried about what's happening right now with the conflict in our cities. That's actually, an example of many other conflicts around the world. I'm worried about that. This divisiveness isn't good. So instead of talking about individuals or certain parties or anything like that, I'd just rather say that I'd like to see everyone be a little bit more humble, to be less polarized. Whatever nation you're talking about, whether it's Canada or you're talking about the United States or anywhere in Europe, this polarization is, for me, a matter of great concern. It's more about whether you're right, as opposed to what's in the best interests of the entire population. So I hope that answers your question. I do worry about all of these situations. I worry about increasing geopolitical tensions. And to be frank, I wish more leaders would read the Bible, would understand the tremendous gift and miracle that we all are, that we're all the children of God, that we all, that He's watching all of us, that we're disappointing God in many of our actions, that we're at the verge and risk of destroying all of this magnificence, the biodiversity, the amazing art and music and literature, all the things that we're privileged to be able to read, the plays, Shakespeare's folio that we just brought to UBC. If we're fighting on the verge of another world war, all of that is at risk and nobody wins. So to answer your question, in generalities, the divisiveness concerns me. And to answer your question, what should they do? I think they should read the Bible.
Interesting advice. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Otto, a question about, you mentioned early on in your lecture about the importance in leadership of debate. And you mentioned that, when issues come up, it takes some time, but different points of view are expressed. In your experience, how do you get constructive debate started when maybe people see differences of opinion as polarizing and it gets personal and they aren't constructive? So what approaches have you taken to get constructive debates underway?
It happens all the time, Richard, and you know it. What happens is that people are so polarized that the timing is not right for them to come together. And sometimes as a leader, if you understand the basis of the distrust, right, the divisiveness, what you have to do is you have to be patient. You have to develop trust between yourself and each group. That means sometimes going into a group where you fundamentally don't agree with their perspective. But you have to be humble. You have to go into the other camp because all of us have views, right? But you have to go into that camp and you have to listen to them. And you have to at first develop that trust. You have to go in to the places where your enemies are. And it's really sort of the fundamentals of diplomacy, right? You get nowhere if somebody is not willing to go to each polarized group and develop trust. And then your job is to gradually talk to each group about the other group's point of view and perspective. It takes a lot of time. And you have to spend a lot of time where initially they'll reject even considering the other point of view. But you need to be willing to take the time. And then you need to know the right time to bring the two groups together. But if you look at what's happening in the news, we're on the verge of conflict, right? In Russia. And you can see people going there, you just saw Macron go to meet with Putin. That's what he's trying to do. And the first reaction from Putin was, I don't agree with everything that Macron said, but there are certain things that he has said which might make sense. So if you think about it, Macron went to meet Putin. It required trust, humility, and I'm sure the initial conversations weren't harmonious. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about France. He's not going, even though what happens there will impact all of us, right? Mm-hmm. He was going there from a country quite far away. Obviously, there's supply chains and there's lots of things involved. It's not that he's going there totally out of the goodness of his heart, but he doesn't have a direct stake in what happens, right? And so there's a leader who knows that there is a conflict that, if it escalates, could really harm our collective well-being, going there to him. Mm-hmm. And the initial conversations were probably still polarized, but somehow during that period of time, and a lot of it is interpersonal dynamics, got to a point where he listened. And I'm sure the beginning was to listen to Putin, right? And then if Putin understands that you're listening, then he'll start to trust and listen to you. And then you can start to move towards a potential solution.
Is it sort of like making friends?
I'm not sure they're friends. It's really more trust, I would say. These things are happening locally too. Mm-hmm. We have a major challenge and opportunity as a nation here in Canada with respect to truth and reconciliation. We've been living that over the past, quite a long time, but especially over this past year with the discovery of the unmarked graves of missing and murdered women and children near residential schools. That's never going to go away, nor should it. The first part is truth, right? And there's a distrust because of a long period of time where a lot of things occurred that are just devastating to the families that were affected. And so we will have to work through this. All of us will have to work through this. And it takes time. It takes listening. It takes mutual respect. So there's yet another example of a challenge, but we have to commit ourselves to addressing what happened with Indigenous people. So,
thank you. Catherine, do you have a question?
Thank you. Yes, I do. From Tim. What do you see as challenges to Christian churches, universities, and organizations when it comes to servant leadership and working together? And do you see Christianity becoming more or less tribal?
Well, some of you may know that several months ago, I agreed to be on this thing called the Anglican Science Communion. And I bring it up because of your question. I guess the genesis of that, because Anglican Church is quite large, as you know, it's quite global. And members of that church, there's so many people all around the world, many different points of view, as you know, and that's actually in many ways challenging the Anglican communion, as you know. And so there are challenges and tensions within that church, but there are also tensions between Christians and churches, wherever that congregation is, and scientists. So the reason why I agreed to be on the Anglican Communion, Science Communion, it's a mixture of bishops. I mean, of relatively senior members of the Anglican Church, with about 5 of us who are scientists. And I think the desire of the Archbishop of Canterbury is that this gulf between scholars and institutions, scientists, and faith communities needs to be bridged. I mean, if you really think about the early universities, Oxford and Cambridge, Harvard, they were in the beginning church schools, right? Many of them are Episcopal schools. And so there was a time, if you go to Oxford, you'll go to the early buildings and you'll see different doorways. And one of them is to study theology, and the other is to study science and the arts. And there wasn't this gulf. And my belief is, and I think the belief of the Archbishop of Canterbury is that gulf is not good for humanity. You know, it's kind of manifests in my life story. Remember, I said that when I first met my wife, Wendy, I gave her a hard time. I was smart alecky. You know, everything had to be experimentally proved, you know, because that's the way scientists are taught. And this, I would say, belief that secular universities should have no component of theology, that's for some reason they're not compatible, is a terrible mistake that we've made in society. You know, the great thing about having the Vancouver School of Theology here at UBC with other schools as well. At the founding of University of British Columbia, if you look back, the creation of UBC here was in the early stages dependent upon this new secular university agreeing to have schools of theology nearby, right? That was brilliant. And I got to tell you, Richard and I have spoken about this and spoken to others about it. You know, we have to bridge that, I wouldn't call it a gulf, because we're so close to each other, but we need to, in my view, I'm very different from other previous presidents of UBC, but I've been very open about the fact that we need to partner more together. You know, the secular parts of UBC have much to learn from the schools of theology. And conversely, I think the students and faculty of the Vancouver School of Theology would probably benefit from the brilliant scientists, right? And experimental and theoretical scientists that are at UBC. And it's almost that there are two ships, not in our case, but just in general, that are like, you know, in the night, you know, moving really together, but not really knowing about each other. That's a lost opportunity. You know, I think that humanity was better served when there was integration. You know, I mean, the thesis of my talk today was that I'm a better scientist, I'm a better leader because of my faith. And it was through challenging myself, through trying to understand how things work, that I realized that everything cannot be explained, right? That the miracle of life is more than, in my view, an accident. And it's not just my view. You can read one of my favorite books, DNA is the Language of God, by Francis Collins. Read it. One of the world's great geneticists. He says the same thing. The more he looked into the miracle of life, the more he realized that there must be a God. And so we have here on this campus, we have great scientists and theoretical and experimental scientists, and we have Vancouver School of Theology. My dream is that we will do more together, that we'll have those tough conversations so that more scientists will understand that faith is going to make them, in my view, better prepared to understand the miracles of the world, but also from a non sort of scientific perspective, that more people will actually learn about servant leadership from the Bible so that they can be better citizens and better leaders. I think that's why I agreed to be on the Anglican Science Communion, because that's the goal of that group, is to bring scientists and religious leaders together to talk about these things, to talk about existential challenges such as climate change, to talk about the ethical dilemma of scientists trying to play God What's happened in my lifespan when I was interested in molecular biology, when we were just trying to figure out what was the chemistry of life, and when people were understanding how nucleic acids work and how DNA is replicated, how RNA is made, how proteins are made, all that's amazing, right? We've actually gotten a glimpse of what God created through all that effort. But we've also, because we have now understood some of these things to the degree that we can manipulate them, whether we're talking about atomic physics or we're talking about genetics, where you can actually at will change the genetic makeup of eventually a child. The problem is through science, humans have reached a point where they can do things that they were perhaps not intended to do, and where they may not have the spiritual and ethical foundation to use that knowledge and those powers that were, in my view, not meant to be human, in a wrong way. So to make a nuclear weapon, or to perhaps for a wealthy person to be able to use the CRISPR-Cas technology to say, I want my offspring to be brilliant and good looking, and I'm going to just change their genes. That could happen. And that kind of poor leadership decision, that danger, is accentuated by this gulf between the lessons of the Bible and the power of science. We need more people that are grounded in faith, and have learned the lessons, the ethical lessons of what it means to be a servant leader. It's embodied in the life of Jesus Christ.
Thank you. I think it'd be lovely to hear how far the Anglican committee has got, but I will move on to other questions.
Only met once.
Only met once. Okay. You got some work to do still then. Okay.
We're starting to think about what it is that we want to do, but the first step is always an important step.
It is.
We have a question here, Professor Ono, from someone attending. Let me read the question. As a Christian living in this time of crisis, I often feel desperate by what's happening with the world and powerless in my ability to make change. Do you have a word of encouragement for Christian students who dream to make a difference in this world?
The first thing I would say is, if you're feeling that way, reach out to me. It's pretty easy. My social media handles are at UBCPres with a Z. And hundreds of students reach out to me on a daily basis. And it may take time for me to answer, but if you're feeling that way, I want to be there for you. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is that you probably don't want to interact with me. I'm an old man. The reason why I've been on the board of student organizations like InterVarsity Christian Fellowship is that they exist to be there for you, to create micro environments in a secular university where you'll be with other Christians or other people who are seeking. You don't have to be a Christian. You can be seeking. You can be a non-believer. And you will not feel so lonely because you'll be surrounded by people who are focused on you and loving you and taking care of you. And while you're doing that, you can also talk about the Bible, just like I did with Wendy and my friends. You can be on the same journey that I was very fortunate. I think, this might sound funny, but I truly believe that, remember I told you that when I went to my friends' churches in the suburbs of Chicago, and wherever I go, even today, as long as there are others who are worshiping, I said I felt chills down my back. I truly believe that that's the Lord touching me. It's just there's no other way I can explain it. I believe that it's part of my faith, and so I want that for everyone. If you're feeling that way, reach out to me. I'll connect you with others. There are plenty of organizations here, churches for students. I was involved in supporting and encouraging a church on this campus called 10th Church UBC. It's a beautiful community and Ken Shigematsu is the pastor. It's also Craig O'Brien with Origin Church. So if you're feeling that way, reach out to me and I'll do everything I can to connect you with someone other than an old man that you should be interacting with.
Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you. Just want you to know, Dr. Ono, that there's many lovely words being directed towards you in both the chat and on the questions, just saying thank you very much for what you're saying today. But one question that I want to ask from Stephen is whether you have drawn some of your wisdom and from other faiths and religions in addition to Christianity.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I said, not only do I feel a responsibility to support and to participate with other faiths, it's pretty widely known that I spend time with Jewish students, Muslim students. I've been fortunate to see different religions in Asia. Yes, I've learned so much from each of those religions. I've been supported and encouraged by leaders in every religion. I'm very grateful for that. And as I said, I really believe that for each individual, whatever their faith, that religion is a central anchor. There's actually a lot of commonalities between them if you read them. But absolutely, I've learned so much from every faith.
Professor Ono, maybe this question is the last. We have about 4 minutes. A student asks, as a servant leader, are there insights you can share into how you've approached serving the LGBTQ community at UBC and beyond?
That's a great question. And I got to tell you honestly, I don't know if the student is LGBTQ, but this is a personal opinion. I firmly believe that LGBTQ students, faculty and staff are all loved by God. I was on the board of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. As you know, one of the things that they were considering was sort of a policy, and certainly there's quite a bit of conversation in the Anglican Church, for example, the disagreement about homosexuality and some of those congregations. I would say that, like I said, I think all of us are God's children. And I personally cannot believe in the God that I believe in would not love people regardless of their sexuality. That's my personal opinion. And obviously it was difficult for me being on the board of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. But I personally believe that the God I believe in loves everyone regardless of their sexuality.
Well, Professor Ono, let me say a great thank you to you. This has been an excellent time together. Thank you for the time that you've spent us, that you've spoken from the heart and made yourself available to students. When you were offering to that one student to be in contact with you, I was ready to volunteer, but then you said, not old men.
You're not old. Richard's a great guy.
Yeah, wow. But thank you very much for your time with this evening. And thank you, Catherine, as well, for helping manage our event this evening. And to Astrid, who's done such a great job managing the technology. And to everyone who's attended, thank you for making this a great time together with your excellent questions. So once again to you, Professor Ono, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.